Okay, so we can reach the end of our level now by hitting that flag, and we can jump into a new level as soon as it loads up. But what if we want to do some things a little bit more interesting? Like what's happening right now at the moment is just our players here. We walk into the flag and immediately we get teleported into the new world. So what we would really like to do is pause the game, or not pause the game, but stop the player being able to move. We will wait for a second or a few seconds, and we can make the player run off to the side of the screen, and then we'll load up our new level. So how are we going to do that? So we're going to need a couple of things. Obviously, first of all, we're going to need some more ground for our player to run along. So let's add a couple of extra bits here. So I'm just going to duplicate this one. We're going to use our V trick again to move it over and lock it into place. Duplicate it, lock it into place, duplicate it, and lock it over here into place. So that should be plenty. And we're obviously going to need to make our player stop and kind of pause here for a while. So we're going to use what we've used before, which is a coroutine, to delay stuff and make stuff happen after a certain amount of time. So much like we did with our level manager when we were wanting to respawn the player, now we can use it to just slow the player for a second and then do some other stuff. So there's a couple of things that we want to do. We want to stop the player moving, and obviously we also want to stop the camera moving because we don't want the camera to follow the player. We want the player to run off the screen, and we don't want anything to accidentally kill the player after he gets to the flag. So we're going to need to make the player invincible, make the player be stopped, and make the camera be stopped. So at the moment there's no way for our camera or our player to be stopped. So let's add something to both of those scripts to give us the ability to do that. So we'll do our camera controller script first. We haven't touched our camera controller script in quite a while since we first set it up. So if we load it up here, okay. So we've got all this stuff here and it's all fine and dandy. But what we're going to add is a new public bool that we're going to call follow target. So this is going to be, this will decide if we're following whatever our target is or not. So in our start, we want to by default make sure that we can always follow the target. So, or not always, but that we're starting off the game following the target. So we want our camera to be following the player as soon as the game loads up. So we'll say follow target is equal to true. And then within our update loop here, we can just add a new if statement at the start and just say if follow target. So if we are following whatever target we have, then do all the code that we previously wrote to follow our player. And then we're just going to highlight this stuff and indent it again like we did before to make sure that we keep everything kind of making sense. So kind of visually when we glance at it, we can see what's going on. So if we're following the target, all this stuff will happen. And then if we're not following the target, nothing will happen and our camera will just freeze in place. So that's perfectly fine. We can just save that and we can go to our player controller script, which I just have it open here already. So what we can do, we're going to do something very similar with our player controller script, which is we'll actually do it up near our move stuff here. We'll add a new public bool here too. So our public bool can move, and then we'll go down to where our movement is occurring, and here we'll say, so we're checking if our knockback counter is less than equal to 0, then we're able to move. But we can also add in here, if knockback counter is less than equal to 0 and our can move is true, then we're able to move. But if our can move is false, then we're not going to be able to do any of this stuff. And like we did with the camera, we want to make sure that our can move is set to be true by default, because we obviously want our players to be able to move around when they start the level. So what will happen if our player is moving to the right and we switch can move to be false? So we won't be able to use our input to reset our player's speed to be 0. So what we need to do then is, what we're going to do is, when our player goes into our level end script, we're going to use our level end script to control the player and make the player stop moving. So we don't need to add anything else extra in here into our player controller script. So that's perfectly fine. So we'll just save this, and then we'll go to our level end. So if we're going to be able to set our camera movement and our player can move ability to be frozen, we need to be able to access those objects. So we're going to add a private player controller that we'll call the player. Private camera controller that we'll call the camera. And obviously to make the player invincible, that's controlled by our level manager. So we're going to use a private level manager called the level manager. Okay, so at the start of the game, much like we've done before, we need to get all three of those things. So we need to say the player is equal to find object of type player controller, like that. Our camera, so the camera is equal to find object of type camera controller, and the level manager is equal to find object of type level manager, like that. Okay, perfect. So like I said, we're going to use a coroutine to now control how our end of level operations happen. So if we go down here, we're going to create a new coroutine. So much like if we go back to our level manager, if we find our respawn, so we have a respawn coroutine here that we needed to make a public IEnumerator, which is just what our coroutines are called within Unity basically, and we had to call it by starting the coroutine here. So back in our level end script, we're going to say public IEnumerator, and we'll call this our level end so our level end coroutine. And basically what's going to happen, instead of scene manager starting straight away, we're just going to comment that out, and what we want to happen is we want to set our start coroutine, and then in our brackets here, the coroutine we want to start is our level end co. So perfect. That's just what we want to do. So we're going to want us to do a couple of things. So what we want to happen is, first of all, we want to freeze the player and the camera and make them invincible. So let's do that straight away. So the player is what I wanted to do first here. The player dot can move should now be equal to false, so the player won't take any more input in. The camera dot follow target should also be equal to false, because we don't want the camera following the player when we start moving again. And the level manager dot invincible should be equal to true, because we don't want to take any more damage by accident by any random enemies that could somehow end up after our flag, or if our player walks over the edge of any ground that we have and accidentally falls into the kill box. That wouldn't be good for us either. So we've got all that stuff set up, but just as an example, let's just save this now and go back into the game to kind of see this in operation. What have we got? We've got a bit of an error here for some reason. I'm not sure why this is causing an error here. It might be because we haven't added in any actual time delays on this. So let's just add a simple one in here. So you'll return new. So say this is going to be how long we wait before the player starts moving again. So we'll just, for now, we'll just say it's going to be 1 second of waiting, and that should hopefully clear up. There we go. Yeah, it was because we weren't doing anything like that. That's why we got a little problem. So we just want to demonstrate what happens when our player gets deactivated on our camera and everything like that. So at the moment, what will happen is if we walk over to here, I'm going to walk into this flag and then let go of pressing right, and we should see our player actually keeps moving to the right, and that's because we're setting our velocity to be a certain value to move towards the right, and we're not setting it to be 0 so that the player will actually stop. So what we want to do, once we reach the flag and set all these things to be true, we want to say, okay, the player dot my rigid body. So at the moment, our rigid body is private on our player controller, so we're not actually able to make any changes to it. So now we can go back to our player controller script, scroll up to where we have the rigid body, and instead of it being private, we'll just have it as public, so that we're actually able to make some changes to it. So we'll go back to our level end script now, and here we'll say the player dot my rigid body dot velocity should now be equal to vector 3 dot 0. So like I said before, vector 3 dot 0 is just a kind of a shorthand way of writing vector 3 0 0 0. So just like it says just there. So that what that will do is it'll set our x velocity to be 0, our y velocity to be 0, and our z, of course, to be 0. So now if we were to just see how that works back here in the game, if we hit play, we should see that when we walk to the flag this time and try to walk past it, our player will just stop in place like this. Okay, so perfect, that's exactly what we want to happen. So what's the next thing we want to do is it'll pause for a couple of seconds, then let our player walk off the screen, and then it will load up our next level. So rather than just having it, we have it just set to be 1F by default here. So let's make an actual value that we can adjust to decide how long we're doing these things. So we're going to make a public float wait to move. So that'll be how long we wait before we start moving. Then we're going to have a public float wait to load. And that'll be how long we wait till we load up the next level. Okay, so instead of this 1F, we're going to have our wait to move. And then after our wait to move takes place, what we could do here is set the player's velocity to be equal to a certain value, or to be equal to our move speed. But what might happen then is that it could start moving and then slow down as it goes across the screen, which it shouldn't happen because we set our friction to be 0, but it could still occur and we don't really want to take the risk of that happening. So what we're actually going to use is something within our update loop here. So to be able to activate something in our update loop, we're going to need a new bool value that we can use. So we're going to use a private bool that we're going to call private bool move player. So then once we've waited for our wait to move to run out, then we can say now we should start moving the player. So move player is equal to true. And then in our update loop we can say if move player is equal to true, then what we want to do is on our player dot my rigid body dot velocity is equal to a new vector tree, much like we've done before, and we want to move it along on the x-axis and we want to move it to the right. So we'll say move speed new vector tree, it should be move speed. Why don't we have access to... Oh, because... Sorry, what am I doing? We need to say the player dot move speed, because we need to get the move speed value from the player. So we want to move it at a certain move speed along the x-axis. We'll let the player's current velocity on the rigid body on the y-axis be the y value, because we don't need to adjust that by any amount. And then on the z-axis we just want it to remain 0, so we can save that now. So now our player will start walking as soon as this time ticks down. So again, we want to make sure that that works, so we want to test that out. So we'll just save that and go back into Unity here, and we'll find our level exit object, and we obviously need to give a certain value to that. So I'm going to leave it at 1 second like we had before, and we'll give a value for our wait to load of about 4 seconds, actually maybe 3 seconds. So what should happen now is we'll walk over here, hit the flag, and our player will freeze and then start moving. So we walk over to here, our player immediately started moving. Why did that happen? Okay, I know why the player immediately started moving, and it's because I just switched to debug mode here, and it's because our move player is set to be true, and that's becoming set true, so it's not set true at the start, because what I did here was a mistake. In our update loop we set our move player equal to be true, so we don't need that at all. We just need to check, we just need to type if move player, and a move player is a boolean, and so that is true. So we're saying if move player is true, we don't have to write equals true or anything like that. So that was just a silly mistake. So we go back in here, and this time we know that our move player will remain false until we actually hit that. So what was happening was our player was automatically being moved to the right, which is no good to us at all. So we can hit play, and now when we walk into that box we get frozen, and then our player starts walking off the side of the screen just like that. So perfect, that's exactly what we wanted to do. So the next thing we want is we wait for our wait to load. So we'll type this stuff in again here. We want a yield return new wait for seconds, and again this is just how we have to write this little sentence when we want to wait for however long. So this will be wait to load, like that. And after we wait to load, then we will do our scene manager.load scene that we did before. So scene manager.load scene, and the name of the level that we want to load is level to load. Okay, so now we can save this, and we can go back into the game, and we'll hit play here, and we should get our level loading up into the new area after our player kind of runs off the screen. So we jump over this, walk into the flag, and we walk off to the side, and we load up into our new level. So perfect. That's just what we wanted to do. So the next thing we want to do is, at the moment our flag isn't getting activated when we walk into it. So let's do the exact same thing we did with our checkpoint script, which I don't have open here. Let me just quickly open it. Give a second. There we go. So what we used there was we used the sprite for our flag to open, and we assigned that to our sprite renderer to say that the flag was opened. And we also in our checkpoint had the flag close again in case we reset it back to the start of the level or anything like that. But we don't need to worry about that, because if we get to the end of the level, we're only going one place, and that's further on. So back up here, we can add some new variable. We're going to say public sprite, no, not public sprite, that we'll just call flag open. And we also want private sprite renderer that we'll call the sprite renderer, like that, because we want to make sure that we get, if we go to our level exit object, we want to make sure that we get this sprite render. Let's just switch back to the normal view. We want that sprite render, and we want to be able to change this sprite in here. So we will basically, all we'll do is we obviously need to get that component when we start the game. So we will have the sprite renderer is equal to get component sprite renderer, like that. And then when we end the level, so when we walk into this area, we can actually even do it outside this coroutine. Let's do it up here. So we can just say the sprite renderer dot sprite should be equal to flag open. So we can save that, go back in here, and obviously we need to assign that open flag now. So we should get an extra little slot up here and here, and we can open our art folder, scroll down to where we have all those flags if we can find them. There we go. So we want to have the open red flag, so we'll just drag this sprite into there like that. And now we should see when we walk into that area, our flag open, and it looks like we've actually done something, and we can end the level just like that. So there we go, we've hit the flag and we walk off into the next level. So at the moment, when we switch between levels like that, it's quite harsh. We're suddenly just jumping into this new world and everything's activated. So let's make it look a little bit smoother as we go between those levels.